Yep, it says live.
Okay, now we're live. All right. Uh, we are ready.
Yay.
All right. This is Lisa Brown. She's a game designer at Insomniac Games. She is a graduate of Center College, which we know, right? And also Carnegie Mellon. And she's been working at Insomniac and Resistance 3 as a designer, Sunset Overdrive as a designer, and currently working on Slow Down Bull.
Yes, that is correct.
And we are really excited to have you here and be able to talk with us a little bit about all kinds of cool things. So we will open the floor to you and go for it.
Yeah, so this is a bit of a hodgepodge talk because I basically had George poll people to see what they were interested in hearing about. And I know you guys are getting ready to do a game jam, so I'm going to talk a bit about game jams, and another theme was stuff you should be doing outside of school to better prepare yourself for entry into the game developer community. So I'm going to talk a bit about those things and hopefully weave them together. Just a bit more information about me. So as Rich said, I'm Lisa. I was originally born and raised in Louisville, Kentucky, so Kentucky has a very special place in my heart. I went to Center College for undergrad, where I double majored in art and computer science, and I also was really involved in the theater department there. After graduating undergrad, I went to work in the theater for a bit at Long Wharf Theater up in New England for about a year before realizing that that was not really the thing that I actually wanted to do. So I returned to Louisville and did work in web development. I actually went back to my old high school, which was Assumption High School in Louisville, and did work as a web developer there, making apps for the students and the teachers and the faculty and whatnot. And while I was there, I was involved in a lot of side projects and things like animation and whatnot, trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. Then I went to Carnegie Mellon's Entertainment Technology Center for graduate school, which is a 2 years master's program. And it was there that I figured out that game development was what I really was into and wanted to do. And after that, I got a job at Insomniac Games as a designer. I actually got an internship with them while I was at CMU, and then went to work there as a designer, and I have been there ever since. So that's like a little bit of my background. I'm still really excited about the growth of the game development scene in Kentucky, so I try and go and meddle as much as I can to be helpful in some ways. So thank you guys for letting me come here and talk. Some projects, like you mentioned, the projects I worked on Resistance 3 as a single-player designer, which is a shooter for the PS3, and I was a designer on Sunset Overdrive, which is releasing tomorrow. Yay! But for the past year, I've been on a smaller, more experimental project at Insomniac called Slow Down Bull, which is our experiment of doing a small person team, for a small experimental PC release, where we've been doing open dev. We've been doing live dev streams every Friday of us working on the game and answering questions. So that's been super fun, and that's what I've been primarily working on for the past year. But outside of Insomniac, I really enjoy game jams, and I have a bunch of screenshots from a bunch of little game jams that I've done over the past couple of years. I really enjoy doing them as an exercise, and I really enjoy the community aspect that comes around doing game jams. So I'm going to talk a bit about that later. So the questions, these were the specific questions that were wrangled for me, which I'm going to condense into this talk. And one of them was, if we have any free time outside of class. I like the if there. That's nice, yeah, if you have free time outside of class. What should we be doing with it to better position yourselves for jobs in game development? So really quickly, I can see the class. How many of you are dead certain that you want to work in the games industry? Just show of hands. You're certain. All right, nice. How many are I don't really want to know what I want to do, but maybe game development sounds kind of cool. I don't know, maybe. No one on the fence. And other people who are just, oh, one person on the fence in the back. Nice. I can only see a section of the class. So that gives me a better idea of that. And then there was questions about the Ignis Scholar program, which I'll cover, And then the next big chunk was how do you get started with Game Jam? And as I understand it, you guys are going to do a Game Jam this weekend or
Two
this
weeks.
Friday?
2 weeks. November 7th. We'll do
November
that.
7th. Oh, it got pushed back from last time we talked. Okay, cool. Uh, so, and there was a question about graduate school. So I'm just going to mash up all these things together and just start with the Game Jams. So how many of you guys have done game jams before? Have you done Ludum Dare or whatever? So
Tip.
most of you have done
Yeah.
this before. So with that in mind, what I wanted to do was I wanted to think about tips that work for me specifically as a professional who does game jams that aren't necessarily intuitive, because there are a lot of resources out there for people getting started in game jams. A lot of the tips that you see over and over about, oh, whatever your idea is, scope it down in half because it'll be too big. Advice about, getting 8 hours of sleep and every night and not trying to stay up for 48 hours to make a game. There's a ton of resources for those sorts of things out there already. And if you've done game jams before, you probably have run into those and experienced those to some degree. So my goal is I wanted to sit down and think about what are the things that I find really helpful in game jams from the perspective of a professional that might be helpful to other people. And I found that when I sat down and wrote them all out, most of the tips had to do with the things I was doing in the time where I wasn't actually working on the game. So that might be a common theme. So I'm just going to go through a couple of them. So the first tip that that I tend to take into account is when the game jam starts, when the clock starts ticking and it's officially started, it can be very tempting to be like, oh God, I only have 48 hours. We have to like go, 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 go and start making something as soon as possible. But I found that what I tend to do with a game jam is when that clock starts, I give myself a 2-hour buffer where I do not touch any of my tools. Like I will not start building the game for 2 hours after the game jam officially starts. And the reason I do that is because you spend your time brainstorming with your team or by yourself or whatever, but it can be very stressful and have a lot of pressure to get started as fast as possible just because you don't have that much time. But if I do this, what I'll usually do is be like, all right, I'm going to walk down and get food and come back, and then I'm going to start the game. Or I'm going to go take my cat on a walk for like an hour and a half, and then come work on the game, and just spend that time just thinking of the idea and thinking of it away from my tools so I won't be tempted to start too soon. And this works really well because it relieves some of the pressure of needing to get started really soon, and it lets you sort of roll the idea over in your head for longer and maybe come up with a different angle on it and really figure out what the best idea for the jam is. And that's why I emphasize like spending that time away from your tools, because I know a lot of people, they'll get together in their workspace and be like, all right, we're going to brainstorm for like an hour, and they'll sit and they'll do the usual brainstorming things and come up with something, and then as soon as they come up with an idea, they want to get started because it's scary, you don't have a lot of time. But if I forcibly remove myself from my tools, then my subconscious is under a little less pressure. And I guess one example of this is in not last Ludum Dare, but the Dare before, I was working on a team with one other person. It was the one about, it was Beneath the Surface was the theme. And we sort of, he came over and we kicked around some ideas and came up, we were like, oh, let's do something about like phobias, and you're a psychologist and have to dig around in someone's mind and find their memories to figure out what causes a phobia. We're like, oh, okay, yeah, we like that idea. That's kind of fun. But before we started working on it, I was like, let's go walk and get food and think about it some more. And because, it was an okay idea, but we both knew that everyone was going to do a digging game because it's beneath the surface. So digging games were going to be like super prominent, and we wanted to do something a little different. So in the time that we walked down and back, where it was like, okay, we have our idea, we want to work on it, but no, we're just going to like talk about it a little more. And we came up with this sort of weird improv game angle where you would find the memories and then make up a story as to why they were connected to the phobia. And it ended up being really exciting to both of us. And we then we were like, all right, now we want to get back and get going because we're excited about the idea. And there's a big truck outside driving down, and it's really loud, and I apologize. Go away. Okay. But the point is that because we spent the time away, it allowed us to, just that buffer time, to find an idea that we were really excited about. A lot of people will say, oh, don't use your first idea or whatever. But when there's a lot of pressure to get started, and especially if you're a beginner and you need as much time as possible, then you can sort of feel pressured into getting started with an idea that is not necessarily one that you're super excited about, that you just know you can do. And sometimes you just need that little buffer time to find a twist about the idea that'll make you excited. So that's like the first thing I always do. And the second one that I always come back to is, a lot of the advice on game jams is, oh, think super simple. Just pick one simple mechanic and go with it, because you don't have time. You just want to focus on something simple, which is great. But something I found is that not all simple ideas are great for jams. And one thing that I do to sort of filter out these things is think about, in the beginning, when you're coming up with the idea, make sure you spend some time thinking about how you could take this idea to polish in the weekend. Because the whole point of the game jam is to take something as full as completion as you can. And you might come up with a simple idea that's really interesting, and you might be excited about exploring it, and you're like, I could totally mock this up and explore it. But you might like sit down and think, okay, how can I take this to polish in 48 hours? And is it something that's easy to do in 48 hours? Because sometimes you can implement a simple idea really fast, but the time it would take to, put it, like explain it, is it complex? Would you have to make a tutorial for it? And how much time is that going to take to put in? And like, what is really compelling? Is this something that's only compelling if it, has scores and leaderboards? And could you have enough time and ability to take that part to polish? Or is it something that you're like, oh, okay, this idea seems really cool, but maybe the art, like the amount of time it would take to polish the art, would it be out of scope for the length of the jam? And of course this varies depending on the jam you're doing. If you're doing like a week-long jam, like thinking about this part will vary. But I think it's important to do when you come up with your idea, because it's very tempting to just get that initial idea and be ready to jump in and start exploring, but just take like a tiny bit of time to think about, okay, if this idea works, how much work is it going to take to polish it up enough to feel finished, or finished enough for a jam, I suppose. The next tip that I always embrace is the fact that constraints are empowering. Like, you already have the time constraint, and often jams have a theme that is also a constraint. But I find that the more constraints I give myself, the more okay I feel about coming up with ideas. The past Ludum Dare I participated in, which was, what was it? It was Between Worlds or something, or it was the one about two worlds being linked. And the theme was, it was kind of vague enough that there were a lot of ideas that could have fit under there. But I was like, I'm going to impose some more constraints on myself, because at the time I was really low energy. So I was like, okay, I want to do something. I want to put a constraint on myself that the mechanic has to be simple enough that I can come up with it, try it, and test it within the first night of the jam. Because I'm lower energy than usual. I'm not going to be spending as much time doing this jam as usual. So that's one constraint for myself. And the other constraint was a personal one that was like, I feel like drawing. I want to, whoa, sorry, cat toy. I want to make a game where I'm going to get to draw a lot. And that's just another personal constraint that I'm putting on myself. And so when those pillars came in, it actually made it much easier for me to come up with good ideas for the jam. And that can be non-intuitive to people, like to beginners. You think, oh, like constraints are limiting, but constraints are actually really empowering, because if you have no constraints whatsoever, the infinite problem space can be really overwhelming. But if you start putting in constraints for yourself, it it again relieves the pressure and makes it easier to come up with ideas because you have a more narrow focus. And I just found that that's just something that I found to be true in practice. So you have your time constraints. You might have a theme constraint. Sometimes maybe you should give yourself a platform constraint. Maybe you should be like, all right, I've been recently learning this tool. I'm going to make an idea that I can build in this tool. Or, maybe you should do something like a personal goal. Maybe you are not an artist but want to make your own art, and you're like, I'm going to make a game where I'm going to make my own art based on my own abilities. And so if you're a programmer, maybe, and don't have any art experience, maybe you've been doing all this shader work, so you're like, okay, this jam, I'm going to do something where I can really use all this stuff about shaders I've been learning, and that's the art style I'm going to go for. So that constraint might drive the design and the idea you pick up. So I guess just like constraints are not limiting, they're really empowering, and give yourself more, and it helps you focus and generate an idea faster. Let's see. This one's a little odd. Mind your transitions. So what I mean by this is while you're building your game over the course of the jam, devote enough time outside of actually building the game to looking at where you are and sort of planning ahead and reworking your plan. And when I say mind your transitions, one of the things I find that kind of throws off people who haven't done a lot of game jams or beginners is they'll have their idea, they'll build their core mechanic, they'll try it out, it'll be going well, all the basics are in there, but they forget about the time it takes to put in transition screens to pull the whole game together. So things like, am I going to have a title screen? How am I going to get from the title screen to the level? Do I need screens between levels? Does it need like summary information? What kind of information needs to be there? Do I need a score screen? Like, is my game not level based? If it's not level based, how do I convey that the player is progressing, and do I need a special screen for that, and how am I going to pull it up, and do I need to pause the game while all that's happening and unpause it? And what about the end screen? Like, does the end screen need to go back to the menu screen? Like, all of these little transition things they're technically polish, but they take a lot of time, and they're not like the stuff that you tend to be focused on when you're building your game. So I always say take some time, like once you get the basics in, maybe in the first day, middle of the first day of the jam, to stop working on the game and just think about what transitions am I going to need through the game so that I can figure out how much time that's actually going to take and rework the rest of my schedule accordingly, because it throws people off. And that can be true for anything. Like if you're making the art and you're finding out, oh crap, this is taking a lot longer than I thought, just like take a moment to stop and replan everything. Just like keep updating the plan. And the time to do that, the really good times to do that, are the times you need to take breaks anyway from the game, to go eat, to go walk around outside and not look at the computer. But you need those built-in breaks, and a good use of that time that is pretty low stress because you're not frantically building the game is to take the time to do that sort of planning. So I would say that those 4 things were the biggest things for me that were not necessarily intuitive that I learned doing a lot of game jams that really helped me out. So hopefully you will find those things to be useful as supplements to all the other great game jam advice that's already out there. And like I said, it's a little weird because all of these things have to do with not building the game, but I think it's important to strike that balance when you're doing jams. All right, so with that, I'm going to transition over and talk about developer community and the question of what should I be doing outside of class to better position myself for a job in the industry. And I think a big helpful thing to do as a student is find ways to get involved with the developer community. And fortunately, game jams are a one way to do that. Like Ludum Dare has a huge community surrounding it. Global Game Jam is like a big global event, but it's not the only way. Uh, I think that it can be tempting to just, do a jam for your own like personal growth. But a big part of game jams is interacting with other people doing the jams, and I think that's a fantastic way to get into the community. So fortunately, like there's a lot of stuff online that you can do to get involved in communities if you're not already. Like I mentioned, the game jams of all sorts, they're always going on. Uh, and there's wonderful site Compo Hub, which is a big calendar of game jams coming up. I'm gonna pull it up if you don't know about it. You probably do, but in case people don't, it looks like this. Where's my mouse? Boom. All right, so it's a site with this giant calendar, and it basically you can scroll through, and it just says what game jams are coming up at that time. So, oh my gosh, there is so many game jams going on everywhere, and all of them tend to have communities associated with them. I'm super pumped personally about 7-Day FPS. That's the next one on my list to do. But if you're going to be on a break soon, and you're like, I want to use that time to do a jam and maybe get involved with some community, like this is a great resource for finding those. All right, boop, pull you back over here. But the reason I think jams like Ludum Dare are so great for community is they there's a lot involved with them other than doing the actual game jam. Like for Ludum Dare, you have the jam weekend, which is like one weekend, but before that you have all the weeks of like theme suggesting and the theme slaughter and the voting, which gets people talking in the community. And then of course you have like the 3 weeks after where everyone's playing the games and voting on them, and that's also a big opportunity to interact with other jammers and sort of get involved in that community. Some of the other things I have on this list are other just game development communities, like TigSource is a big one where people go and they share their progress and they get feedback from other developers. Then there's a lot of communities surrounded by specific tools. Like I know the Unreal 4 community right now is really strong with involvement when people on their forums and on their Ask Hub. So another one is Construct2 is another tool that has a really strong community. So you can find ways to get involved in those based on the actual communities that have that sort of interest going on. And then there are communities surrounding specific disciplines, like Pixel Joint is a great community for pixel artists and games that is very active, that has a lot of places you can get feedback from people on your work, and places where you can find people to collaborate with if you're not an artist and you're looking for artists to collaborate. So there's fortunately a lot of great places out there to get involved where you don't have to be like physically located. But that said, getting involved in communities that do have like physical presence is also really helpful because it allows you to meet other developers and actually network with them in person, and it can be fantastic. I don't know, is there an IGDA chapter in Kentucky? The last time I checked there wasn't, but it's been a while. Yes,
Not
no?
that I'm aware of.
Not that I'm aware of. Someone needs to change that. That is homework for someone, is to get that going. Because the IGDA is it's a big, organization, but I find that it's really positive on a regional scale. Like there are some places that just have really active IGDA chapters. Pittsburgh was one of them that had a really good chapter. Boston is another that just has really involved chapter that runs events and gets developers from all walks involved, and just are great places to get stuff involved, which can be difficult if you don't have a chapter in your state. But that can be changed because pretty much anyone can start a chapter. So maybe you guys should look into that. So as far as finding ways to get involved in the community with physical presence, I would also recommend going to festivals and conferences, even as a student, because there's a billion for games and game development out there, and you should be finding ways to get to these and go to them. This slide, I intentionally picked some conferences that were more East Coast, Midwest centric, because I know that can be a challenge being in Kentucky, where there's not necessarily like a huge tech center. It's not like being in LA or San Francisco, where there's a billion game development studios and a lot going on. But there is stuff out there that's a little more accessible, like location-wise. Indicate East is in New York. MagFest is in DC. Fantastic Arcade is in Austin, and there's a lot of other stuff in Austin as well. Escapist Expo and East Coast Game Conference are both in North Carolina. Meaningful Play is in Michigan. And all of these have different slants, right? Meaningful Play is an academic conference focusing on like academic application of play. Indicate East is a celebration of independent games that enter contests, and you can go and play all kinds of games, but it also has like conference track and talks about indie games. And MagFest has a big focus on music, and Fantastic Arcade is all about really arcadey games and getting people together to play them and whatnot. So there's all different slants. But if you can find a conference that you're sort of interested in, and try to go there and try to meet other game developers and talk with them and bring your prototypes and get people playing them, it's fantastic. Similar to Compo Hub, there is a wonderful website called Game Comps. If you do not know about it, this is what it looks like. It's very simple, but it allows you to browse game conferences. You can do it by region, you can do it by year. So like if you go down and look for United States, this was 2014, but it just lists every single month and the game related event that's going on that month. And there's a billion of them. There's so many game events happening, and they're all over the country. So I would say at least once try and pick a conference that you think is kind of interesting and get yourself there. Some of them are pretty pricey, like GDC is super expensive. Some of them are not that expensive for entry, especially the festivals. So, it's just a matter of figuring out a way to travel up there. But that is it's a fantastic way to just meet other developers and form starting relationships with them, and that's fantastic for putting you in a place where if you want to go into the industry, because you just learn a ton from each other, and just getting that experience is really helpful. So that is that. Related to this, the going to of conferences, one of the questions was about the IGDA Scholars Program. Where are my notes? Boom. So I wanted to take a moment to talk a little bit of that. IGDA Scholars is a program where you submit an application, and they'll give scholarships to students to get them to conferences. And at first it started out just being GDC, the Game Developers Conference in San Francisco, but they have expanded considerably, and they have scholarships to go to like Gamescom and GDC China. I think they did one. So they've expanded it to send students to lots of different conferences. The reason the program is so great is because in addition to just like sending you to the conference, they also connect you with a mentor, like an industry mentor, that you connect with during the conference and hang out with and learn from and just talk about like your interests and the development community, and they can help you figure out what talks to go to, and it's fantastic. This picture is actually from 2008, and look, oh, there's me. Oh, look, I'm a student. Look how student-like I am. So I actually got a scholarship through this program that sent me to my first GDC, and it was a really important experience for me. The way you apply is you have to, do your basic application. You have to write an essay, I believe, and they're really looking for people who can convincingly show why them going to a conference would really benefit them. And for me, at the time I was actually not sure if I wanted to go into games yet, but at the time I was like, this is important to me because I'm looking into games. I'm not sure. Oh gosh, go out of here. I'm not sure exactly what I want to do in the games. I was like, I don't know. Do I want to be a producer? Do I want to like, oh, Hangouts, you're just like killing me. Hang on, let me turn off notifications. Let's see. Disable notifications for 8 hours. You're in timeout for 8 hours. There we go. Uh, so they're really looking for people who have sort of unique ambitions about games, and how are you going to impact the games industry, and how is this sending you to a conference going to give you the experience you need to help you succeed. So I would really recommend you guys apply for it. I think they're still taking applications for the GDC scholarship. And the GDC is amazing, and if you get a chance to go, and it can be a really, really positive experience for helping people figure out what they want to do in the industry and helping people see like all the developments that are going on in the industry. And the mentorship program is fantastic. So that's a big one. There are way more game scholarship related things now than there were when I was in school. So you guys have an advantage on that front. I think the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences is also another one that has scholarships for students in games. And that was another one that I managed to get, and I applied that scholarship to going to another conference. So if you feel like you should be going to conferences, which you should, then applying to specific scholarships is a great way to try and fund that. So the last question that I wanted to address was about graduate school. The question was, do I need to go to grad school to get into games? And there are a lot of pretty compelling graduate programs in game design. There's USC has a fantastic program in their interactive media and games division. They have a master's degree there. Carnegie Mellon, which I mentioned, is the school I went to, and their entertainment technology center. And then NYU Game Center, they have an MFA for game design as well. So there's a lot of really good schools for game design. But as far as do you need to go to grad school, I would say no, you don't need to go to grad school. The thing about the games industry and getting into the games industry is we are very much focused on what you can do and showing us like what you are able to do. So we don't really care where you went to school or if you have a master's degree. It's just not a thing that's on our radar. We don't care. What we care about is what you can show us in your portfolio, your ability to show us that yeah, you can make games and you can make games well, and you would be a good fit for the studio or whatever. The thing about if you should go to grad school is the things you need to get into the industry are like a killer portfolio, a network. Whoa, did I just like drop connection?
No, we're still here.
Still there? Okay, sorry. It looked like a drop connection. You need a good killer portfolio. Having a network of peers in the industry helps a ton. And having access to resources. The resources being, maybe tools. Maybe you're really into VR and you want to do a lot of stuff with VR. And maybe, going to graduate school is a way of accessing all those things. It's just one way. So when you figure it out, you have to figure out, is this the best way for me to access these things? If I need to have access to teammates to do team-focused projects, because seeing team-based projects is really important on a resume or portfolio. Will it help me get access to conferences? Like Carnegie Mellon, they sent all the students to a conference of their choice every semester. And, you have to decide, is that trade-off worth it? Is being surrounded by other people passionate about making games, which can be a huge benefit, a huge motivator, and that's something you can get in grad school, but you can get it other places too. It's not the only option. So it's really a very personal decision about what resources are available to you, how can you get to them, and is graduate school the best option for you, and is it worth the cost? Because student loans are bad. I don't care what people tell you that everyone has them. They're bad, and if you could stay out of debt, that's really good. So you have to make that call for yourself, but it's not the sort of thing of, oh, if I want a job in the industry, I have to go to USC. It's the only way. Get a master's. No, it's not. It's really not. We don't care what your degree says. We really don't. All we care about is your ability to show what you can do, and school is a path to being able to do that. It's not the only way. So yeah, that was a big long ramble. I hopefully addressed all of those questions specifically. So basically, what I would recommend is you guys finding ways to get involved in the developer community, be that through doing game jams, be that through going to festivals, and maybe, you know, if you decide the graduate school is an option for you, there are certainly programs available that are really good and that can help you do that. But they're not the only way. But the onus is on you. It's not enough to just do your schoolwork. You really have to make the effort to reach out beyond your curriculum and just beyond school and find ways to get involved in those communities. You know, you can find ways to link them up. If someone starts an IGDA chapter, you can certainly do lots of events through schools. But you know, it's going to take a lot on you to just get yourself in there, which can be challenging because you're expected to also be working on your games and building up your portfolio. But the benefit of getting involved in the developer community is that's a fantastic place to get resources and feedback on your stuff. So that's my general advice for those specific questions. And I wanted to cut it at like 35 minutes so that I would have plenty of time to answer questions that you guys have for me about all that. So that is the end of the talk part. So thanks for listening. And now I'm ready for questions.
Does anybody have any questions right here? Ready?
One note: you guys
really
are like really quiet, so
Okay.
you might need to repeat the question directly into the microphone, just so you know.
Here, I'll start it off. Specifically with game jams. I mean, so if you have you seen a good example of or can you explain one, using a game jam entry in a portfolio? I guess like the good way to do it versus the bad way to do it.
So game jams as portfolio pieces are tricky because I think that the value in the game jam is not necessarily in the product that comes out of the 48 hours of whatever you were doing. The value comes in the experience you had through it, and the especially if you're working on a team, and the way you use it to get involved in the community. It can, you know, some people, and I always admire these people. Some people will do a jam, you know, they'll get their feedback and they'll be like, all right, now we're going to make this thing real, and then they spend like, you know, 7 months on it making it for real. But as far as, okay, I've done my 48-hour thing, I'm just going to throw that in my portfolio, that can be trickier because it's not really showing. It's a good supplement to a portfolio, I would say. It is not good as the primary meat of the portfolio. And if you guys have not seen it, my fellow designer at Insomniac, Liz England, has this fantastic blog series called From Student to Designer, and I'm gonna show it over here. And it is all about the things that a student needs to do to go from being a student to getting a job in AAA. And it's AAA focused. I realize not everyone wants to go into AAA. Some people, you know, want to get in on the indie scene or whatever. But I think all this advice is relevant. And she has this whole thing on portfolios. And one of the things that she says that I think is really important if you want to eventually get a job at a studio is that when a studio is looking at your portfolio, they're not, the first question in their mind is not, is this person a good game designer? It's not. The first question is, does this person have the skills I need to fulfill the need on my project? And so it can be, like I said, game jams are a great opportunity to try stuff that's wacky and weird and experimental, and those can be fantastic design supplements. But the meat of your portfolio needs to show off that you have the skill that it takes to work in a studio, like the technical skill, uh, the design work skill, and can you communicate about your design clearly and efficiently. So, and also, can you iterate something to a degree of polish, which is not something that you get in a game jam. Like the whole point of the game jam, you polish it to the point where you throw juice on there so that it's like a compelling final experience. It doesn't show off that you can take something to polish the way a portfolio piece should be. Liz actually recommends that you spend like at least 3 months on a portfolio piece for a game. And so I would really, I'll send you this link to this article because it's really thorough and great. But let me just scroll down here. And she goes over like what makes good portfolio pieces, what makes bad portfolio pieces. Mods can be fantastic for portfolio piece. Again, if your goal is to get into a studio. But I still think that game jams have tremendous value because you can often do a jam and then that could be a starting point for something that you want to polish up for your portfolio, or even just make into a game, like a commercial game, and enter into festivals and stuff. So I think that game jams are great for their community involvement. You should definitely be doing them, but don't rely on just like doing your 48-hour jam, throwing that in your portfolio and calling it done. Like it's not enough if you want to use that portfolio to get studio work. It's a supplement. So yes, that's my answer to that.
Sure. Do you have any questions? I can field any. Do you want to yell or do you want to?
I can articulate pretty well, I think. Can you hear me?
Kind of. I might need a repeat, but go ahead.
She can see you.
Yeah, just like, what was I going to ask?
Wow.
First of all, shout outs to a fellow theater geek. That's awesome.
Woo!
I guess when you're putting together your portfolio, I guess for a graduate student, like how much are they expecting you to have done? Like if I have one major project and a bunch of small game jam things, if that's all I really had time for, do I need to try to get like at least a few really major projects on there? I mean, how much am I expected to have beforehand, I guess?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And when we're looking at portfolios from students, we definitely understand that it is a student portfolio, and so I think that like Liz recommends 3 to 5 projects that show like the breadth and depth of your ability, and at least one project that shows like 3 months of polish work. So like the 3 to 5 projects can be like student projects, they can be class projects, they can be supplemented by game jams, but at the very least, one of your portfolio pieces should be like, all right, here's something I'm going to take and I'm going to hammer at it for 3 months and I'm going to polish the crap out of it. And that can be like, that could be your own personal game project, that could be like a Skyrim mod, that could be like it could be anything, but the point is at least one of those needs to be like, here's something that I have shown my ability to iterate, to polish, and have a considerable amount of depth on. So at least one basically is the thing. As long as you can supplement it with things like game jams or student projects or whatever. That I think is pretty solid. And once again, I want to keep reiterating that this advice is specifically targeted towards students who want to go into AAA. But I think that it has value for anyone wanting to go into any sort of game development. And even if you want to go indie, that process of hammering out a 3-month-long experience is only going to help you.
Any other questions? Yeah. You want to come close so they can hear you. Just the mic.
So,
Hi.
pretty basic question. I wanted to know if you were a fan of Insomniac Games, or if that influenced your decision to try to pursue a job, or did they just pick you from the batch?
It's interesting because, so even though I didn't know I wanted to work in game development, I'd always loved games, and they were always a huge part of my life. And Spyro the Dragon was like a huge part of my life in high school. It got me back into consoles. But then it's just like it wasn't even on my radar. I was like, oh, I want to work for Insomniac, because at the time, the idea that there existed this thing that was a career in making games was just completely off my radar. What happened with Insomniac in particular was, as a student, as a first-year student at Carnegie Mellon, they take all the students out on a trip off the West Coast. They go to LA and San Francisco, and you visit all kinds of different game studios and effects houses, and you tour them, and it's really a great opportunity. But when I went, Insomniac was one of the places I visited, and I remember, it's actually funny because just before, the day before I went to Insomniac, I went to another game studio, and it was like really bad. It just felt like the people we talked to were super jaded and burnt out, and it was just like, oh, maybe I don't want to do games. This sounds terrible. But then I went to Insomniac, and Ted, the CEO, came and talked to us, and they had a bunch of senior people come and talk to us about what they did and how they did things, and I was like, this place, it just feels amazing. I really like these people. I can just feel like the camaraderie of the team here is super amazing. I really like their philosophy. I really like their studio culture. And so when it came time to apply for internships, I just saw that they had a design internship. So I was like, oh yeah, I'll apply to that. And you know, when I applied to that, I did research on some of their more recent games, because I'd played like Spyro, I'd played like the first Ratchet and Clank, but I hadn't played any of their recent games. So I did a bunch of research on, you know, Resistance and some of the more recent Ratchet games, just so I could know about what they were working on. But it wasn't like you don't have to be like a super fan. That's not true of all places. Some game studios, you have to be a super fan to work there. Like Riot, you pretty much have to be like, you have to be really into League of Legends to nail a job at Riot. But that's not true at all studios. And at Insomniac, it was more, you know, I did their application, I had a phone interview with the lead designer on the project I was going to be working on. We talked about a bunch of design stuff, and it just went really well, and so they hired me for the internship. And then really all an internship is like a 3-month-long interview. So at the end of that, they were like, hey, you're super cool, come back after you graduate. And I was like, all right, that sounds awesome. And that part of the story is really boring. But I would say that when you get to the point where you are applying to work at studios, you definitely want to have some context for their work and the stuff they do and what they've been working on. It just helps. I mean, that's true of any job anywhere, not even in games. Like when you go to interview at a company, you want to have done some research on the company. But it's not like, it wasn't critical that I was like an Insomniac super fan to get a job at Insomniac or whatever. It just happened to be like, all right, this person has the skills that we need, and we think they'd be good fit for the team. So that's how that went.
Good question, John.
Yeah.
More questions. Yeah.
Since you brought up Riot,
You brought
since they're like the pioneers of esports and growing esports, what do you think esports has when it comes to game development? How will it change the game development process?
All right. Well, I'm actually a huge fan of esports. Like, I was really into StarCraft 2 before League of Legends became big on the scene. And StarCraft 2 I think StarCraft 2 like did more to pioneer the road for esports than League. I feel like League like rode off of that and just made it like insanely massively popular. But I mean, esports have been around for a while, but I think that what got them to be really popular now was the intersection between the games coming out, the trend of streaming, and the availability of like seeing things on video, which made it easier to spectate basically if you weren't at a tournament. So I'm actually a big fan of esports, and I think it's I think it's going to grow in interesting ways. I think that now that it's sort of like common to mainstream that there is a huge following for esports. I think it's going to make it easier for more indie games in the esports division to find a place in in the culture. I think that there are some challenges with the competitive structure, and you can look at it and look at traditional sports competitive structure and how they solve some of the same problems. One of them, which happened with StarCraft 2, is Korea pretty much dominates the esports scene. They're just like super super good. And with StarCraft 2, when it first came out, there was pretty even spread of scenes. Like North America had a competitive esports scene with a pretty substantial following. But Korea is just so dominant that it sort of reduces the interest in the foreign regions if everyone knows, oh, like these people are so good, they're gonna win. Why even bother? And like I worry that might happen with League. Because right now we have a pretty strong North American scene. There's still a pretty strong European scene. But it happened with StarCraft 2, and Korea is just, I mean, they're like, esports is their thing. They're going to be super dominant. So I hope that they can solve that. And the way they solve it in traditional sports, like, with the NFL, they have the draft, right? So that you're not going to have like one NFL team that has all the super best players, and then you have like the super football team that just destroys all the other football teams. But esports doesn't really have like a sort of house rules metagame system like that yet. And I don't actually know if that's something that would develop or if it would help, but it's an interesting comparison because that's how traditional sports solves that problem of like keeping one region or one particular team from just absolutely dominating the entire sport. And I don't know, maybe it'll come into to esports someday. Which I realize is kind of a ramble, but I'm into esports and I think about this stuff a lot. I think it's only going to get more popular. I think there's more opportunities for indie esports to have a foothold. And I think that the advent of the streaming technology is what really kicked that along because it just makes it so easy to be a spectator. So I'm super excited to see where esports will go from here, I suppose.
We had a question via Twitter.
Okay.
Okay, so do you believe that as the dev community grows in Kentucky, that it's possible to see a AAA studio appear in the state?
I have no idea. AAA is tricky because, I mean, AAA is just really hard, and you can see some other places that were not, the West Coast that did have AAA studios have been struggling, like Boston. Boston at a time was a fantastic intersection of the indie community, the AAA, and academic because they had all three of those things there. They had a really strong IDGDA chapter. There was lots of cross-pollination between developers. They would have an event, and the AAA devs would go, and the indie devs would go, and the students would go. And there was just like a fantastic community. But as like the AAA guys started shutting down in Boston, that was one of the side effects that suffered. Austin is a similar way. Austin has had a lot of rough time with its AAA studios, shrinking. And there's a big tech center in Durham, North Carolina right now. Like Insomniac actually has another studio out there, and so that's exciting. And Epic's out there, and you can see that starting to that like facility starting to grow. But it's just a huge challenge. So I don't know. Maybe someday. I definitely know that Kentucky would be fantastic to support an indie developer scene, just because the cost of living is so reasonable, and because there is already a little scene growing, and you're pretty centrally located to some other hubs as well. But figuring out like if a AAA studio could be sustained there is really hard. It's super hard. But maybe, I don't know, never say never.
Any other question? Yeah, sure. Okay.
So for like AAA development and stuff, I know there's a lot of tools out there like Unity and CryoEngine and Unreal. What would you recommend somebody like in school to, I guess, learn with or kind of
find their specialty in? You know what I mean? Like use the most. Would you recommend any sort of tools for us?
I would actually recommend that you get as much experience as you can learning new tools. Unity is really popular right now. UDK is always great. There's still like a big, heavy Unreal community. But just the ability to sit down and learn a tool set and become, if not proficient with it, just at least have working knowledge and be able to build something in it is useful, because a lot of AAA studios still use proprietary stuff. We use proprietary tools. I'm using Unity for my small project, but for our big project, our tools are proprietary, and there are a lot of AAA studios that still use their own proprietary tools. So what's going to help you is your ability to learn a new tool set fast. So I'd say if you're interested in like 3D games and in AAA, like if it depends. Like if you were like, I really want to, I really want to work at Infinity Ward and work on Call of Duty games, then you have some advantage there because, well, it's a bit tricky because they have mod tools, but they're kind of old. But there's like tools there you can use to make those sorts of games. I think that learning at least one big complex beast of a tool set like Unreal or Unity or CryEngine or what is going to be super helpful, just because the ability of you to learn and be able to do stuff in that tool is just going to set you up to be able to learn other things. So I don't know if it's necessarily important for a student to have a specialty, but you should have like some level of proficiency with at least one. And it really, if you're interested in AAA 3D games, then Unreal and Unity and CryEngine are good for that. Unity is kind of great because it's broad enough that you can use it for mobile games or smaller indie games or whatever. And if that's sort of what you want to go into, then tools like Unity or GameMaker or anything like that are just useful to know. I try and learn new tools often. Unity, like I knew Insomniac stuff. Construct 2 is a favorite tool of mine for game jams. I ended up using Unity for this project. GameMaker is on my to-learn list, and I am doing 7-day FPS in UDK, which I have like fleeting experience in, but I'm doing the game jam in that as a way to get used to it. So I would just, to reiterate, I just recommend having the ability to work in and learn new tools. That in and of itself is a skill that's super important.
Is there a question? You want to ask? Okay, one more question.
Okay.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm trying to think of how I can really word this question. It's you said you worked on Resistance, which was
Worked on Resistance 3.
Resistance 3, which was I guess a Sony exclusive, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and
Yes.
you've done work on Sunset Overdrive, which was
Yes.
an Xbox exclusive. I was wondering if it was any different working between the two, or like if there were any surprises you had to overcome or anything like that.
It's definitely different. The tech is different, so it happened at a weird time because on Resistance 3, between Resistance 3 and Sunset Overdrive, our tools went through a revamp. So we used completely different tools between the two projects. There's a lot that's different about developing on a different platform. And all publishers are different to work with. They have, some publishers are more hands-off, but some are more involved. Each publisher is really different to work with. But the thing is, like, Insomniac is an independent. We're not owned by anyone. So, we have to be flexible and just figure out. It's a balance between figuring out how to develop games on multiple platforms without reinventing the wheel every time, and also staying flexible enough that multiple platforms are viable options to develop on. That's why tools like Unity and GameMaker are, I think, going to be really strong, because I mean, it's not like as easy as clicking a button to publish on multiple platforms, but they do support multiple platforms, and so I think a lot more smaller devs are going to start using those. But yeah, there's definitely a difference in the tech. And also, it wasn't just like switching from PS3 to 360, right? It was a whole console generation tech change, which we would have gone through that anyway. So everything's changing all the time in game development, and you just have to be super flexible, and you have to have the ability to learn new things, new standards, and new ways of coding and new tools, and you just have to have that ability because it just changes so rapidly. So yeah, lots of challenges, but it's par for the course for game development, I suppose.
Yeah, Daniel. One more, is that okay, Lisa? You okay with
Yeah,
one
that's
more
fine.
question? Okay.
Yep.
And this is kind of a question about the AAA industry and Insomniac Games. I know
Okay.
you're in the design department. How much communication do you do between like other departments in the company? Because I know it's a really big company.
Yeah. Okay. It's like, so I think this is true with most sectors of game development, but it's constant overlap. Like, you sit in a pod next to a programmer and maybe an artist, and you might be working on something with a programmer who's also working on, an artist is also working on, and you're just constantly communicating with other disciplines in the team. There's no like segregation between like the design department does stuff and then the programming department like implements it. No, everyone is sort of constantly communicating and overlapping. In pre-production on Sunset, like pre-production teams are pretty small. And I really like pre-production because people wear multiple hats because you're a small team and you're just trying to like get prototypes up and running fast. So we had a handful of designers, a handful of programmers, a handful of artists/animators, PM, and we had John, our writer. And at Insomniac, the audio team is like a shared resource. They're like their own team that works on all the different projects versus having like, this is the audio designer for my level or whatever. So we didn't, for the purposes of the pre-production, we didn't have an audio person because the whole audio team was busy working on Fuse. So John, the writer, was like, well, I'll learn how all the audio pipeline works so that we can get sound into the game. And, he's the writer. He's not like an audio person, but someone needed to get it done. And in the pre-production phase, like, the designers are making art and the programmers are also designing. It's very much an overlap experience. But even in production and on, there is still constant communication between the disciplines.
All right.
All right.
Yeah.
Is that,
we really
is that
appreciate
the last of the questions?
Yes. I think we're good. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for having me on. I'm always up for answering questions and stuff, so if people have other questions that they didn't get to ask, you can just follow me on Twitter at Wordle or shoot me an email. George has my email. I'll be happy to answer questions.
Oh,
So thanks so much.
thank you again. We appreciate it.
Okay, and good luck with your game jam.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right.
All right. See ya.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.